Evo, kao što sam ranije najavio, naši drugi gosti večeras je studio Ruderal, a s nama su Bena Hackenberger i Giorgi Nishnianidze. Ruderal je ured za krajobraznu arhitekturu, urbanističko oblikovanje i planiranje sa sjedištem u Tbilisiju, u Gruziji, i studij je posvećen temama revitalizacije degradiranog okoliša i pokretanju novih ekoloških procesa u zatečenim kontekstima izgrađenim i neizgrađenima. Osim specifičnog projekta pošumljavanja urbanog područja Tbilisija, s kojim su ušli u uži krug nagrade Mies van der Rohe, i za njih još nekoliko recentnih projekata sličnog tipa u domeni modifikacije nekog neizgrađenog krajolika u Varšavi i gruzijskoj Betaniji. Ured uz naše goste danas, Giorgija i Bena, ured vodi i Sara Kaus, koja nije danas mogla biti s nama. Giorgi and Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. Can you hear me? Is it good? Okay. I'm Ben Hackenberger, and this is Giorgi Nishnianidze.
Hi, everyone.
We are with Ruderal, as was said. We want to, that makes sense. So we're with Ruderal, with the director of Ruderal, Sarah Coles, and we are very excited to present four projects, actually. One of them we have not presented before, so this is exciting. These three projects, one of which is the Tbilisi Urban Forest, which is the project involved in the Mies Prize, which we would also like to thank the Fundacijom Mies van der Rohe for all of the opportunities and interesting experiences that we've had since joining this community. So I will begin by reminding myself that Ruderal, I always forget to define what is Ruderal. Ruderal is a term that means adapted to disturbance. So it typically describes plant species that are adapted to disturbance. And so our director, Sarah Coles, she has been working with this term for over a decade, and particularly in the education space for landscape architecture. So we've entitled this talk, Establishing Ruderal. Here's me and Sarah and Giorgi. We're located in the Republic of Georgia in Tbilisi. That's the main base for our practice. Probably I don't need to go too much into where this is, but usually we're like it's in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Russian Federation are our neighbors. These major locations here, Tbilisi, Bakırçıkent, which is in Kakheti, which is a major wine region, one of the major wine regions of Georgia. And also, Sarah has done a lot of work in Borjomi, which is an interesting
Famous for its mineral water.
Famous for its mineral water by the same name. Delicious and salty. So there's a lot of cultural context to Georgia. We are working with this, we're working in this context, but we also like to highlight a little bit the global position of Georgia, which is very complicated. One of the things that makes it a very interesting and dynamic place is that it is along the so-called Belt and Road. So we're seeing a lot of investment in transportation infrastructure, which is something that is not always apparent or foregrounded in narratives about Georgia and about the region. But that actually is a huge way that the country is changing. So we like to foreground that. Basically what that means is that there is a sea route across the Caspian Sea, then by rail, and now increasingly by trucking across the country to the Black Sea to reach the EU. So one of the physical effects that has happened in Georgia on this is the Rakoti Pass east-west freeway, which involves 96 bridges and 53 tunnels, to give you a sense of how large that is. This is sort of the landscape that it went through, that the road previously went through. This is the previous road, kind of nice landscape moment. And now we're seeing 96 bridges and 53 tunnels cut through this landscape, which is indicative, I think, of the overall types of changes and the scale at which change is happening in Georgia and how that's spatial. So to give a sense, I think it probably used to take about 8 hours to get from Tbilisi to Batumi, which is the second largest city on the Black Sea coast.
Westernmost part of the Georgia, yeah.
And now it should take 3 to 3.5.
Yeah. And also we see the first time Georgia kind of approaching landscape on this scale, as it has not been, it didn't have opportunity before historically. So this change is important for the landscape practice in general.
Some more visual impacts of this. So we're based in Tbilisi. It's like a gorgeous city. This is Tatsminda, the sacred mountain, chaotic translation, but more or less correct, right? So this is like what looks over the city, and we think a lot about landscape here, and we draw a lot on how the historical framework of the city, we might say, comes from a lot of different eras, but there is really a lot of landscape in Tbilisi in the way that it was built up. There is there's many influences, but some of the major are like the Safavid influence, the Russian colonial influence, there's a Germanic influence going on with the left bank of Tbilisi, which is kind of like this grid here. And then finally, obviously, the Soviet era and the post-Soviet era. So one of the things about working in the post-Soviet era is that there are a lot of historical kind of threads that we can pull on. There is also the collapse of of the Soviet Union, which means that there's the whole history of how landscape was working in terms of the city, and then there was also the absence of that. And in the absence of that, there is a lot, actually, and what we try to work with is building back up, not necessarily to just bring over landscape ideas, we might say, because as you can tell, I'm American, maybe you can tell, I don't know. But the idea is not to bring over and transplant these like global or Western ideas. Georgia's also like global and Western in a lot of ways, but to work with the systems that landscape implies. So that is why we often highlight the way that a lot of forest regeneration work that was planned in 2010s and so has led to the major local supply of plants. And so that's why we're highlighting this here. Also, it's gorgeous. We love this types of plants. So we're going to talk today about these 4 projects, themes, emergent beauty, like coming from these like Georgian endemic species, native species, and also some cosmopolitan species that were brought. This idea of grafting into baseline conditions, which is related to like the physical effects of these historical frameworks that we're talking about, which can be very complicated culturally, but what we work with is this as a baseline condition, something that can be grafted into. We love a plant metaphor. Expanding this to a forest scale, and so taking like that metaphor, how does something scale? Because a forest is on a very large scale, sort of necessarily so, and there's a lot of kind of complexity and cultural implications that come with that. So we're not just thinking about how Georgia is affected by the scale of infrastructure that's being built there, but also it can grow with complexity. So a little bit of a like optimistic approach here. And finally, we'll talk about the new project, which we have not talked about before. We're very excited to. We're calling that Small Spaces and Larger Moves. So the first project that I'm going to talk about is the Botania Forest Garden. It will be through the theme of this emergent beauty. Just a little bit of context, it is 13.54 kilometers away from Tbilisi as the crow flies, as we say, so that's like the direct line. It takes like a lot longer than you would think to get there because it's significantly higher in elevation. I think it's maybe at 1,000 to 1,200 feet.
So it's like 600 meters higher than the capital you take path from. So there is quite a change. And like Tbilisi's surroundings are dominated by that factor that you always change the altitude so dramatically to get to the outside of the city.
In this urban surroundings, which as Giorgi said is like are much higher than the city and kind of difficult to get to, there still is a very intense like pressure for suburbanization going on here, and we're seeing this in like maybe we could pull on the generic theme and say that this is usually what's happening here, like things scaling without being specific, so we can see that this is being filled in as such. This is Okrokana, which is much closer to the city than Betania, which is where our project that we're going to talk about is. But this is in 2006 already, and it's much further. So we call this max it out and retain, which is the idea which it seems that many of these houses have. So what that means is that what they have done is taken their land plot and maxed it out to the very edge and built a wall so that there can be like a flat space, which is sort of a very reasonable thing in some way, but something that we are not very excited about as designers of landscape. Some of the principles that we're working with here, as I mentioned briefly, but it's about promoting the growers of endemic species. So there are like some very specific species and subspecies that are like not only in Georgia, but mostly in Georgia. And so we're focusing on that, and that brings together the ecosystem, also the economy of these small growers and sometimes larger growers, as I showed before. And finally, we're focusing on like the aesthetics. So we were very lucky in this project, actually, that there is a local grower just on the other side of the mountain. I don't know if that shows up here, but this is where the project is, as we know, and that's like a north-facing slope, and on the south-facing slope is the grower of these trees, which we used for this project. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we looked at these nurseries and started to think about how the repetition of trunks, like the sometimes uncannily ordered landscape, because a lot of these are not like natural forests, we would say, they're like intentionally planted. And also this like deeper texture of the meadows became important for this project. Again, thinking about the spacing of trees, about understory, how this can be organized. The actual like project is basically a backyard, and so we were thinking about how this big picture window, which is the main feature of the living room of the house, can be enlivened or brought to life by this landscape. So we have in the background of this, in the far background of this is the house. This has since been filled in. The neighborhood is like much more dense now. But the context is the forest in the background, this pasture which was fenced off and mowed as a residential lawn. So that was a process that we were observing. And then you can also see a little bit better on site, but these arrows help us, that there are cow paths running through this. So they've been kind of like taken away from the landscape, like cut off from the wider landscape, but those elements are still there, and those are the pieces that we were working with to create this scene. To go back to the larger forest context, it's a beech hornbeam forest. There's a large diversity of understory at the edges, which forms kind of a dense background to the project. And then also there was this lovely moment that already existed in the forest itself. So the project became about connecting the house to the forest visually. Here we are observing this on the site. A lot of the atmosphere comes from the really vivid shadows that work in these forests, in these beech hornbeam forests. This is the foreground that we're splicing into. This is the view, the mentioned view that we're splicing this more diverse landscape into. And you can see a little bit these, you can really only see the terraces because of how the lawn has been treated. The atmosphere, it's a north-facing slope. It has a lot of fog and mist kind of action going on, and so we wanted to highlight that. The project concept came through with this half and half because we wanted to bring the forest in, and we also wanted to work with the existing grass and see what would emerge out of this meadow. So what we did is introduce these 10 to 15 species in the end, surrounded by this oversized stair. So kind of a very straightforward direct access to the forest approach here. And then in the theme of emergent beauty, the 12 to 15 different species that we ended up selecting, selecting with what was available from this nursery, which was an interesting process, becomes like from which the beauty emerges. We had to really do this ourselves in some ways. It was like a very interesting project to put together the installation team, to work with the grower, and to understand like how it was that he was going to do this. So there's like obviously the kind of internationalized standard way of planting a tree, which is based on like preserving its longevity, and that was not really like operating in this context. So there was a lot of observation by us, but not a whole lot of intervention. This was the result, the initial planting, no understory at this point. As I mentioned, it's an emergent beauty that we're trying to establish here. So we proposed that the dynamic nature of the space would come from this management approach of coppicing trees that are growing more aggressively, seeing which of these species survive after being moved from the south slope to the north slope, which ones thrive, and bringing in this element of time. This is sort of that complexity starting to emerge.
We've been happy with the result of the project as well.
It was
it's been successful, and I think like few important aspects what are missed in terms of the context is that Georgia's like residential landscape being dominated by the practice to import trees from Turkey or from Italy, which are not at all like grown in Georgia, and then like planted by the people who are not the best professionals, we would say. So like this project was trying to revive the culture, to grow, like to promote the growth locally, and then also learn together with the people how to accomplish this project in this context where there is not much of the knowledge of doing residential landscapes this way. So I think we should highlight that aspect, right? Because guests may think that everyone is doing this way landscapes in Georgia, but unfortunately not. And other aspect was that the client of the project had a little daughter, and the steps, planned steps, become kind of the learning path for her to learn about the local species, what grow in the surroundings. So it has this double meaning. So it's a connector element. It's also can be a seating and attract, like could be used during the parties they organize. And as we said, it's a learning curve.
Yeah, totally. The idea about the stairs, totally. The idea about the stairs is, yes, the connection, but also when you go on the stairs, then the plants are like right in your face. And so that is like, you can see them literally. And then also it was very interesting to like discuss with the client and also their guests and their tenants later about what they actually thought about being so close to the plants. It was like, why is this crazy, basically? So, and we explained, this is biodiversity, and how does it make you feel? So yes, as Giorgi mentioned, it's fundamentally like a family landscape. This stair is meant to be play, but not like overwrought playground kind of thing. We're often asked to make playgrounds, and so this was an opportunity for us to test how minimal we could be. Could it be a stair? And luckily, this is a family of architects, so they're interested in stairs. Again, this backdrop, the diorama approach, became really important for the interior of the space as well. Yay.
This is me. This
There's
time it's
Giorgi's
me.
moment. Yeah. And Newly, that's Sarah's dog. So yeah, I mean, life is like lived on this deck, which is amazing, and this is the background. And
as years will go by, these trees, some of them will not make it, and therefore it will be always changing. So result will be always unexpected.
Yeah, and it should be mentioned also that this was modified Miyawaki approach. Miyawaki forest is like a super densely planted forest after the inventor, Miyawaki. And we took this and we kind of ordered it a little bit more, so it was an experiment to see like what happens in terms of that. Also, the trees are a lot bigger than would normally be in this. In this method, you plant seedlings. In this case, we planted larger trees, which was sort of what was available, which is interesting. So it's sometimes a little bit counterintuitive that we would do something that is not an ideal planting practice, but that was also an interesting experiment to not view like nature as something that we're like protecting and like being very precious about, but something that is actually kind of fundamentally about competition and emergence. The second theme is grafting into traces. This project is the Arsenal Oasis project. It was commissioned as part of the 2020 Tbilisi Architectural Biennial. This is a project that brought our studio really together because we did it together on site. We started online in 2020, June maybe, or May, which we all know what was going on then. And then we finally brought our team together in about a month doing this project, which was amazing. The subtitle of the biennial was Repatriating Public Space Lost During Post-Communist Deregulation. And so, also, what do we have in common? What do we have in common now? That was a good question. So, the site was a 19th century Russian colonial military base, which is built on this kind of, I don't even know exactly how to describe it even after all this time. It's like
On this plateau.
Plateau, yeah, it's like a sloping plateau between two. It's a very good site for your military site, I think, which is why they did this.
Strategic point, yeah, in the city.
Yeah, exactly.
Bomb easily Tbilisians.
Amazing. Yes, exactly. So this was like this so gorgeous, like natural landscape. And then, of course, as it goes, military installation, plateau. It was terraced like super aggressively, circulation up the middle. And it really was like an enclosed, dense settlement, which is wild because now it's like this. You still have the terraces, but that terracing actually creates like a super open kind of sense of space up there. So this is actually one of the most enclosed views, which we were drawn to. Sarah found this like with a friend, again, during COVID. It says 2019, but I think it was spring of 2020. And what is happening here is that the herds people who are like shepherding on this land have created this dam so that their animals can drink. Again, the terracing, what they're drinking from is the pond created from a broken pipe, which is the sort of origin of this site specifically. So there's the role in the larger city, but there's also the fact that this broken pipe meant that there's this oasis coming down. So there's one broken pipe. These are the terraces, which we can see. There was one broken pipe at the top and another here, which is like spraying water. One of them is like bubbling water and one of them is spraying water, which is a nice contrast. And also, as we can see, animating the landscape with green. So we sort of didn't know exactly what to do with such an amazing, already beautiful site, but we knew that there are terraces, and so we started to work with this grid system and think about the different elements on different scales. We have, for example, the foundation, which was in units, the foundation of this building, probably the barracks or arsenal. And but then also trying to introduce smaller scale elements and finding some way that there could be a loose logic to access the site specifically for the biennial. And so that is how we sort of broke down this grid. Here's Giorgi saying to break down this grid. And it was, as I mentioned, an interesting experience to learn like how does the studio work together with our hands specifically, because we are working mostly with people who trained in architecture in Georgia who have an interest in landscape, but then that is also helped by actually doing stuff in the landscape, which I also did. This is in process. How does our studio work together with our hands? Free and feral phenomena is what we said was going on here with this spraying water, which we collected in an echoing of like what the herds people were doing.
So intention here was to like break up this existing foundation, one section, and then through the experiment plant the trees and see what's going to happen in the future. That had to be mentioned, I think.
Yeah. We had some really small elements going on with the with these circular pavers. We like to tell this joke that we really wish that we had not made them circular because people literally just rolled them away. So next time we're going to do that differently. But it was modular elements, so we were thinking about that. We like really were like brainstorming with the team. How can we like get these people to come here, do this? Like the guys came, they like had this board, and they're like, we're gonna lay it like this. And it was an interesting like experience, kind of negotiating again with people who are like doing this. So it became a little bit of a hybrid of like what we would do for the biennial, where we're gonna show that we're really good designers, but also what people were gonna do who were hired by us. So of their own kind of experience and expertise, which ended up being really good because they did it on time. So another element that we had here were these metal grates, which were amazing and modular, and then also we kind of counterintuitively put them all together into something that doesn't work as a module, and so that was annoying to move in, but we thought it was good because it emphasizes this axis across. So again, breaking this grid. And what's going on here with the planting is that this, over the course of the probably 2 weeks that we were doing this, after we had broken through the concrete, it started to fill up. And so we were like, okay, so it's gonna stay, at least for a little bit, this water. So we moved some of the salix. We basically cut down a lot of the salix and turned them into stakes and planted them here. And what we have going on is Platanus acerifolia, which was an interesting choice, which they're surviving, they're not thriving, but that is an interesting aspect of the project as well. So we're breaking up the concrete, as is a very important thing to do nowadays. And we're also kind of testing how much you actually have to do. So there was a lot of like permaculture discourse going on with our team, and we need to build up the soil, and that hit the real hard reality of like, we don't have time to like compost some stuff. So that was interesting. But I wonder if we have, but this is like, it's going. There is a lot of organic material, so we did not need to do any composting. But we are cutting it down every now and then. So this is just an overall...
This is like explaining what we've done, basically. So the existing condition was just a broken pipe, and then we broke it even more to get more water. And we were lucky that nobody really cared that water was just running, right? That's important factor. Yeah. And after like amplification of these systems, basically we ended up with this new landscape, which was a composition of existing conditions and this new grid system. And maybe next slide. Mm-hmm. And then like, yeah, this is the result after 2 years. So 2 years, imagine, no one shut off that water. So garden went really crazy. And do we have slide when it burned down, or it's like
I don't know if I put the burning in here.
Yeah, so in the middle, like after year 1, there was an accidental fire. So everything got burned down, but like after year 1, everything resurrected. So that added another layer of ambiguity and interest for us.
This was another moment where we learned about what people think about landscape and nature, because some of our closest friends were like devastated that this had burned, and we were like, that's so interesting though, because it's now a burned site and it's going to change the ecosystem. So some people buy that, and some people are like, no, I still don't want my park to burn down. So all of this is kind of moving toward the idea of that developed over actually this lasting, the pipes staying on, all this stuff that we were like, okay, maybe this actually is a way to show that parks and public space don't need to be like, hey, this is a park, there's benches, there's like this kind of stuff, that a little bit of cues to care, a few cues to care added to the landscape can sort of create a new type of park. And the hydrological system that Giorgi was describing also was kind of in the beginning about this. As you can see, this, where it was spilling over before, it was like completely dried out. And so that was our first kind of studying of the landscape, what happened when it's totally desiccated. Then we ended up actually feeding this a lot of water with our whole process. We have some trenches here. There are like subtle shifts happening in this over the last 5 years that mean that there's a lot of interaction now between the drying out, which is really important because at this moment, for about 6 months, the pipe has been completely shut off. It's okay. We love that, but we don't also. But it's interesting. There's, it really allowed us to think about how to change perspective about dry landscapes, about xeriscaping, these kinds of things that are like tightly controlled, but what if you let go of a little bit of control? This is the project that was nominated and shortlisted for the Mies Prize. This is where we're going to talk about forest scale. So this is the, again, the capital of Georgia. This is the zone of the Tbilisi urban forest, kind of in between, actually, Tbilisi and the Botania project. We ended up publishing about this, which was interesting to kind of draw some parallels to other situations, to imagine like if we were not actually doing this in this specific context, which is normally what our practice is about, like this is the site and we're going to work with the site. We were able to sort of zoom out and think about that. And we really developed through that this idea that we're grafting into baseline conditions. The baseline conditions are that the main elements of the city, okay, so here's the botanical garden. Here is going all the way over here, that Tbilisi urban forest zone, which is designated. It's an incredible diversity of different types of slopes, north-facing, south-facing, like canyons with water all the time, totally desiccated slopes. So kind of a strange zone to choose. The most important part of it was the front-facing part, which was historically forested. If we go back like thousands of years, the idea is that this was like a heavily forested area, anthropogenically deforested before very many records at all, and then reforested by the Soviets with pine trees. So again, looking at this is the front face, and this is like really the front face. You can see Narkala from most places in Tbilisi's Old Town Solovki, which was the Safavid garden in this area, which was then later covered in the Russian colonial era and turned into a gridded, lovely neighborhood. On the backside of this, we have the Botanic National Garden of Georgia. So there's like a really weird diversity of species going on the south-facing slopes, some of which have jumped over to the north. The way that they made it a forest again was like this. It was very much about performing the idea of making a forest. It was like a public-facing activity. We're doing it, promotion and public relations. So we had to just kind of like investigate this landscape and figure out what were the remains we actually found through this process, going out on the site, arguing about where these plants were actually going to go because it's super rocky face, and the clients wanted a lot of plants, and we were like, there's not enough soil. So we identified these planting pockets, which was incidentally the ones that had been cut by these very strong people.
So Soviets were our involuntary participants or collaborators on the project.
Exactly. We like recruited them retroactively. So then the story goes that these planting pockets were like dynamited into the cliff, so that's a fun thing too. It was looking like this, Soviets did this, looking like that, Soviets did this. this is like, as I mentioned, just kind of what's going on in this peri-urban settlement. So this is the urbanization context for the larger urban forest. We were given a lot of information about this specific part, huge PDF, lots of DWGs. It was amazing. This, our most important face, more DWGs. This is the larger, this is a pilot project for the larger forest, so this involved breaking it down into patches, which we called evergreen forest, because we always need evergreens. We're always asked to do this, so we kind of think of different interesting ways to do them, such as this red, cotinus. Cotinus, which is like smoke bush, became very important for this whole project. Savannah edge was another patch. Celtis forest. Celtis is like a beautiful tree with a nice kind of minty green vibe. We used computational tools not to like overcomplicate it, but actually to account for the shifting amount of supply that we had. We weren't at any one time sure that we could get as many trees as we wanted. There were a lot of kind of random trees that were found from different places and like asked to be included in the project. So having this parametric model was really helpful. This is more like what that version of the parametric model looked like. We were like, okay, this is going to distribute the species within these polygons that were found in the PDFs and DWGs. But we also thought about how this might unfold over time. So this connects to the Botania project in the sense that we don't know exactly which species are gonna like take off, but we could make a rough estimate of which ones had already thrived on this north-facing slope, and also by characteristic species behavior that some grow faster than others, and that helped inform our spacing that we prescribed. It was really important that we did visualizations for this project because it was a public-facing project. This is how those patches overlay on the Narracalla Ridge. This is detailed information about how those work. It became a protocol. So this is our like planting protocol. It has things like, if there's a rock, plant it next to the rock. And it also has things like, this is the general spacing, this is the, so we're kind of covering the bases because this was also an experiment in how to get complexity out of a really not precise installation process. This is a section of how the pine trees gone, and then we're planting new trees in there. And there's also a lovely crumbling path on the site, which we hope will be invested in. We made construction documents. Even though it was a protocol-based project, we still made this, which was interesting. It was a good way to visualize how that goes, and also to create, like, these are like specifically the trees that were essentially treated as specimens, so we did need to cover our bases in terms of making sure that those were planted in the right places. Gorgeous. Again, we pulled from this larger system of nurseries that had been set up mostly for forest restoration in like the big forests, we might say, and so we were like, actually, let's do that for the urban forest, and we used like every single tree that they had. This is what it looked like when we did it, and we were like, uh-oh, hopefully it grows, and it did, of course. One of the main things that was like really exciting about this project was that people were like, oh my God, it's green. And they think that it's like because of the trees, but actually it was because like of irrigation. So that means that it's like totally emergent. There is like hopefully this idea that these species, these larger trees that were planted, of course, like maybe a little bit later than they should have been, not exactly at the right time.
But we're gonna figure out in 20 years, so no
Exactly.
one's gonna care about us.
And the fundamental idea of bringing like color and dynamism to this space, I think was actually really successful, if I do say so myself, because I had a balcony that faced it. And I was like, we did a good job. So this is making that point a little bit more delicately and beautifully, is that there is actually like a huge amount of diversity that came out of this seed bank because it was pine dominated before, but adjacent to the botanical garden. Now we reach our fourth project. This is the new one. You want to take it away?
Yeah. So after all those projects, we finally got started got trusted to do something more commercial, I would say. So this is in the eastern side of the Georgia located. It's a hotel. And as we've seen in previous slides, Georgia is dominated by the topography, which creates kind of challenge for the developers and kind of people who want to build something because they don't know how to approach it, or there are no tools nor knowledge. And we were invited on this project for pragmatic reasons, as a client has built the building, the hotel, but once it was kind of erected, they realized they couldn't enter the building, so they needed a landscape architect to solve the circulation. And we saw it as a good opportunity kind of to sell our ideas, like new novel ideas about this circulation and also like planting strategies. So because of a number of reasons that we didn't have control over, such as like construction methods or the budget information, which was not clear in the beginning, we decided to go with larger moves. And this would allow us kind of to shape the land in general terms, but leave some of the results, some of the spaces to unexpected outcomes. So we wouldn't know exactly what would be, like how much investment client would do, or like what would be the commitment of the contractors. So the result of these larger moves became the sequence of different kind of spaces or the moments. So we see the viaduct, which kind of connects the hotel entrance to the pool terrace down the line. And if we switch to the slide, we see that the result is the sequence of like different moments and spaces which couldn't be initially like thought to the exact detail, but it's very interesting as the person or the users can observe the surrounding landscape and then relate back to the hotel they're visiting. So this always like creates ever-changing experience of the shift. This is one more gorgeous shot. So this is my favorite, as you can see like relationship between the existing landscape, which is very beautiful, obviously, and that's the main selling point of these development projects, the views they sell. But our viaduct actually makes it possible to experience this momentum. So this is one more terrace, which will be programmed and used for the outdoor bar and party space. And these are the other larger moves we were talking about. And then do we want to talk how we plan this path?
Sure, yeah. This is the major, well, okay, so there's the viaduct, which will just say that this, I will note that this is max it out and retain, and we had a very like bad reaction to that. We were like, we need to do something completely different. It was a good reaction, but yeah, we're doing that. And then here, we're solving this grading problem with like a really smooth, sweeping path, which we called the Sky Beach. And the Sky Beach is related kind of to the wider landscape, which I think we'll see in some of these images, but it's like a, yeah, whereas we're kind of being back and forth really quickly and aggressively maybe with the viaduct and the pool and the entrance to the hotel, this is like where it sort of relaxes and sweeps out over this landscape. And we perched this lovely playground in the trees here, which we love. Is there anything else about this?
Yeah, I think one more important aspect is that as the general approach would have been that to max it out and retain, build these big concrete walls, In this case, we build smaller concrete walls. So this way we preserve the landscape character, which is like what we care about, obviously, to keep it like culturally relevant. But what client cares about is the flat areas, right? To put the program, to sell more amenities to the guests. But the result is like a win-win, because we got the reasonably scaled terraces, program terraces, and still kept the character of the landscape.
And we spent a lot of time making the grading of this like huge sweeping path. There was, at the beginning of this project, a big focus on the gradient of the slope of this path, as it happens a lot. That concern dissolved a little bit over time, but it was replaced in our minds by this like obsession with seat walls. We were like, we need to make these walls nicely scaled. And what we did then is like bring the landscape like really high up and try to smooth that again with this curve. So that was done parametrically. This was an experiment that we did where Sarah and I had the same old school grading professor where we learned in the same like pen and paper way. And we were fighting a lot in a good way about how this should work in the studio. And I said, okay, we need to like use Grasshopper for this. And Giorgi was like, exactly, we know how to use Grasshopper. Like that will help us learn to grade. And so it kind of overcomplicated things, but it did absolutely help us prove that we could bring up this landscape, have the gradient work out, have a buildable structure. So there were like a million ways that we tried to like print this out of the computer so that we could get it to be actually built. And in the end, they were like, oh yeah, we can use a 3D model and we'll use the points. This is the 21st century. And we were like, great, okay, good. So we were confident, but.
And the second phase of the project is still ongoing. Like it includes smaller architectural elements as well for public amenities like such as showers or like security buildings. And we kind of like to antidote of what has been done as the on the main building, we try to use the local practice of like casting the concrete in a weird way, but also keeping the new standards of like sustainable architecture, meaning insulation of the buildings. So actually, even though these buildings don't look like that they're gonna meet like energy codes, they're meeting the new energy codes as they're insulated and also reasonably scaled and placed within the landscape.
A huge win, fought for a long time, a good job. So again, we're repeating this sweeping curve on a smaller scale, integrating paddle courts because we have sports. Plant.
And this is the planting aspect of the project. So the idea behind the planting was, again, to create highly contextual planting landscape. And the forest, which was established along the viaduct, brings the idea that you will be walking through these densely planted trees and creating kind of classic hide-and-seek move, which are dominated by the local species. And these are like our contractors wondering how they're gonna plant the trees on the slope. This is the entry of the hotel. So this one being structured as the continuation of the local landscape as it's dominated by the vineyards. So this is how local vineyards, contextual vineyards, meet the building context.
And overall, this idea of like fitting the, so some background that I forgot to say is that this was an in-tourist hotel, that it was almost the exact footprint of the hotel that we see now, so they like rebuilt it. And the circulation used to go, and tell me if this is right, Giorgi, but it used to go like the road would come down here and go back. But we, even though we were making this like a recreational landscape and like kind of trying to tie it into this kind of pattern in the landscape, this is totally a Sarah Cole's genius invention. the Sky Beach to make it like a lawn, but also related to the wider context. And then one day we realized, like, oh my God, we actually like just made this road again up here, which is kind of fun, you know? It fits into the landscape that's agricultural and also into the way that this slope has been shaped, planted with these pines, again, different, more lovely kind of pines, but it really is a hybrid between the context and especially the agricultural context and the new development. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you for this inspirational and cheerful lecture. So first, are there any questions from the audience? He was the first one.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. I was actually wondering, for all of these projects, do you have a high pressure of invasives that are bound to come into these kind of systems that start off as endemic? And do you like give a system of aftercare for all of those projects, or do you just let things go feral?
That is a great question, because another word for ruderal is invasive sometimes. So so yeah, we're like basically trying to work with the conditions that are actually that are the perfect conditions for invasive species typically. So we are also working in this context of like very little control over what kind of maintenance is going to happen. But I would say that actually my observation overall is that people really want to do weeding, especially in the residential landscape, but even more so in this kind of like hotel landscape. We're often actually in the position of like, let's just see what develops. Because if you keep weeding it every year, then you're gonna get the same species that are adapted to that specific context, or the person that's like selecting species when they're doing that. So we're like cautiously subscribed to the like no bare soil model, if that makes sense. And we're working sometimes with mulch though, like especially more recent projects, we're experimenting with what we do with that so that we can like simulate the idea of bare ground. But yeah, I mean, do you have we haven't seen any like major invasions in our project so far, but this is obviously much discussed. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have three very quick ones, and then we can go and drink. The first one is who was the investor, the client for the military area? Because it's a military area. The second one is, did you ever calculate how much water came out of that pipe in 2 years? And the third one is off topic. So I heard that the underground nightlife in Tbilisi is amazing. And is it still like that?
Well, okay, so the client for this Arsenal project was the architectural biennial itself. So we did not talk about this, but the political framing of it, political is maybe a strong word, but in a design sense, political, that we were like, this should be a space where the public space that had been taken away by post-Soviet development could be like, it could be like reparations that we were gonna like save this space. So that was like kind of the just made up idea, like about that in general. I mean, we believe in it, but it's not substantive necessarily because it fundamentally is a biennial installation. The second question was about, although it is, and then unfortunate that also the larger context being that we are constantly seeing a lot of like plans to develop this space. We don't actually know how it's going to be developed. It is a government space, yeah. Previously, we were seeing more private proposals for this, and there actually was at the bottom of the slope, like a really large building built there last year, 2 years ago. And now there are some government proposals for building of this, but we don't know like how that is going to unfold. The second question, can you remind me? Water.
The amount of water.
That's a great question. That would be really interesting because probably we could estimate just visually how we did that, but we really didn't focus on saving water in this project. as you can tell, yeah. So I mean, it's interesting. It was also provocative because we debated this a lot. Like, Sarah and I, like, have lived in California before, and the whole thing is like, you cannot waste water, period. It's not necessarily the same context in Georgia. I think everyone should save water as much as they can, but it was not a, like, we need to demonstrate to people how a, like, no water landscape can work. And so we were like, this might be the last time we ever get to do this. So, like, we're kind of, you know, not gonna tell them to shut it off. And they'll, like, notice, and actually, of course, as I said, it's been shut off, so we're saving water now. And the nightlife in Tbilisi is still good, I think.
Party is still on. Party is still on.
Party is still on, yeah. Yeah, it's good. Most of still open. Thank you so much.